Hallo und willkommen zu einer neuen Ausgabe unseres ISA-Podcasts. Mein Name ist Janine Traber und neben mir sitzt.
Ich bin Sophie Koser.
Herzlich willkommen. Wir freuen uns sehr, dass wir heute eine Podcast-Aufnahme machen können zu unserem Special Issue Dossier. Wie sagt man denn sowas?
Schwerpunktheft?
Ah, genau.
Oder Dossier?
Genau, zu unserem Dossier, in dem es um Queerness in Afrika geht. Das Ganze wurde herausgegeben von Sophie, die neben mir sitzt.
Das könnt ihr auch alles auf unserer Website nochmal nachschauen.
Heute bei uns zu Gast ist Khawla Ksiksi. Wir freuen uns sehr, dass sie heute live bei uns zugeschaltet ist. Sie ist eine leidenschaftliche Person, die Jura studiert hat und sich mit Gerechtigkeit, Gleichheit und der Befreiung von Personen einhergeht. Oder soll ich das auf Englisch machen?
Ich glaube, jetzt können wir es auf Englisch machen.
Okay, dann mache ich das auf Englisch. So, Khawla Ksiksi is a passionate advocate for justice, equity, and liberation. So, as a gender equality, diversity, and inclusion advisor, she works to make inclusivity a lived reality and not just a policy across humanitarian programs and crisis contexts. She has helped to implement Tunisia's first anti-discrimination law, and she has co-founded the organization Voices of Black Tunisian Women to amplify Black women's leadership, build solidarity networks, and demand visibility in a society that often silences them. So we thought that she would be an ideal fit to speak to us about some of the issues that were raised in our special issue. Khawla is also a founding member of Falgatna, a radical queer feminist movement fighting for Sogi rights and supporting LGBTQI+ communities through direct action, digital resistance, and survivor-centered advocacy, something that we're also going to speak about surely later during our conversation. Previously, which is probably interesting for our German audience here, is that she has also led regional feminist and climate justice projects at the Rosa Luxemburg Foundation that probably many of our readers and listeners know. And she has been engaged in North and also in West Africa. So welcome, Khawla. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Janine. Thank you so much for hosting me.
So maybe as a starting question, of course, it would be super interesting for us to hear something personal about yourself. So can you maybe recall a specific moment at which you felt like you want to become active as somebody engaged in the fight for inclusive equality and the rights of queer people, especially on the African continent?
Yeah. So actually, it's a combination between direct and indirect reasons. So I started my activism by 2011-12 after the revolution in Tunisia. So to give a little context, in Tunisia, we were living in I can say a dictatorship for 50 years. And by 2011, we had our revolution and we had the opportunity to feel like we are real citizens and to be able to belong to the country and to start initiating changing and the transformative process that we needed to be implemented. So I was 18 by then, and it was the perfect opportunity for me to explore civic spaces and all what's related to human rights and activism. Also, I was raised in a very political family. Both of my parents are involved in politics, so I had access to this kind of discourse, to this kind of topics at home. And I think that what brought me to LGBTQI and racial justice is my identity as queer Black woman in Tunisia. And also the fact that by 18, 19, I started to develop awareness about the kind of discrimination and oppression that these communities are facing. Because when I was young, it was difficult for me to label and to have political vision about my personal life. So I think this combination brought me to be involved in these spaces. And then with time, I evolved and I changed perspective, and it was a journey for me.
Yeah, cool. So we can see that in your lived reality, this struggle against discrimination has been very present. Maybe it's not in everybody's minds who might be listening to us that the Black community in Tunisia is very often the target of discrimination, and has been fighting a lot of political struggles and everyday life struggles. But especially, of course, as a queer person, we have a kind of intersectional experience in that dimension. Something that when people in Europe are often thinking about queerness in Africa, however, is that often when you enter such debates, you have a kind of discussion about whether queerness is actually part of what some people might consider an African identity. So, my next question for you would be, as provocative as it is queerness actually African?
Yeah, so you reminded me firstly to do my usual disclaimer for people because I know that most of people in the world they don't know that there is black people in Tunisia and because of invisibilization and everything. So I want to tell everyone that there is 15% of the Tunisian population that are black. So it's a minority, but not that much. And to answer your question, about queerness in Africa. And I believe that in my activist journey now I am in the place of digging and wanted to know more about the history and about the roots of what we are living right now. Because by the start of my activist journey, I was more focused on actions and what we need to change for now, but also exploring the identity, what is rooted in our unconscious and in our history is very important. And my research was very impressive because I realized that before colonization, and when I talk about colonization, I talk about uh, the entire African continent. So even the Islamization, as people call it, for me, it's another type of colonization. So before colonizations and organized religions in the African continent, the perception of queerness was very different of now because um, people have different perspectives on spirituality and being queer, and it wasn't labeled at queer, but like queer, but some personalities are not considered as men or women, were not gendered, and these personalities had very prestigious space in society, in the meaning that they were considered as a spiritual human being, and they and as elements of mediation between different worlds. So actually, these beliefs were most more on the normalization of queerness in Africa. And I can name the Dagon tribe in Mali. They considered people with double sexuality, they name it double sexuality in their own language as mediator, and they believe that if you want to be, or if you belong to higher kind of a human being, you don't have to identify as a gender, to a specific gender. It also, I have a lot of examples. I will not share them all, but this was the practice in West East Africa and North Africa, as I know. And then after the colonization, the narrative shifted because a lot of many reasons. I can address it in the coming questions, but colonization reshaped and created a new version of our way of analyzing and addressing queerness in Africa.
So, if I can summarize, so for you, queerness is part of the African identity. So, you would rather oppose people who would say, oh no, queerness is something that has been brought upon us by foreign influences from Europe or North America, for example.
Yeah, actually, it's rooted in the African country identity, but also it is before colonization, and I can share with you researches on that. The classification in society was mostly based on social status or lineage, who are your parents, to which tribe you belong to. But queerness was a part of the society, was normalized, and it didn't pose any conflict in the African society before colonization.
Yeah, at this point, maybe I want to point out that, of course, we will sometimes speak of something like an African identity or the African past, which is, of course, an overgeneralization. But as a matter of fact, the experience of colonization is something that most African countries share. So, in that sense, we are trying to just give a broader picture of that.
100%.
So how is queer life changing, if it's better or easier in a Muslim or a Christian dominated country?
Yes. So it's a good point after what we talked about the African identity and what's happened in Africa before colonization. So in my analysis, all of the organized religions that we have, or the religions that we have, that we know right now, Muslim or Christianism, had the same narrative, especially in the beginning when it comes to sexual identity and queerness in Africa and also in Europe. And let's say globally, I will not I don't want the conversation to be Europe centered. So I think globally, the organized religions impacted a lot what we call by queerness in the continent. And I will not say it's easier or more difficult for one religion or other because it's different challenges, it's different context, and it's different realities. Some aspects are very clear that we are not on the same scale. But when we analyze the religion itself, before interpretation, before evolutions, because also some of the European societies, they took a step back from religions when it comes to legislations and all what regulates society. And some of the African or Arab-speaking countries, let's say, they are sticking to the religion as a resource for their interpretation of life. But analyzing the religions itself, I think it's the same discourse, it's the same narratives, and it's the same restrictions. And I want to add something to that, that even the beyond religions, because when colonization started in some African countries, and it was not actually because people were not registered in the administration, so they didn't have to identify their genders, and coming with the religion and then coming with all the bureaucracy, it brought this aspect of you need to decide your gender now,
All
and
of a
you need to
sudden, it was a
decide
thing.
exactly, and you need to decide your religion now, and if you're in or out. And it was a moment in which you have to identify as something, and this fluctuance and this openness and flexibility that people had before stopped at some level, and then it started be um, to be implemented deeply in the conscious and unconscious of people. So I will not say that I prefer this religion to the other. I would say it's the same discourse, but with different interpretation. Because even in the Muslim community, there is a big movement in Canada called Muslim queers in Canada. And some of them are imams, most of women are veiled, and they are very open to queerness and they identify as queer. So it is the interpretation that differs from a religion to another. It's not the religious text itself, because I don't think that there is much difference between the texts.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that was very important to make that clear that religion here is not the problem, but yeah, it's rather the interpretation, as you say, of how you interpret your moral standards and making gender and sexuality a categorization along whose lines you want to put people into boxes and define them. So we have already now heard a little bit of a historical drawing while we started with the beginning of colonization. The question is queerness African or not in its original sense? So if we come now to maybe a little bit more the recent developments. So let's say, for example, within the last 10 or 15 years, because you mentioned that you have been an activist since you've been 18 years old, can you see that global trends, what we have seen in this time era, have had an effect on how queerness has been debated on the African continent? Do you see some major instances that have had an impact? I think I can summarize the question as, do you see that in the last 10 or 15 years there have been global dynamics with regards to politics, environment, and also economy that have had a massive impact on how on the African continent people are discussing and perceiving the topic of queerness differently, maybe?
Yes, the first step for me and the biggest achievement that is shaping until now our way of doing and our realities as queer movement is bringing intersectionality from the theory to the ground and to our daily work. Because in the beginning, queer movements were very isolated from the other movement because of all the social framework that is still present in our societies. And then the most fascinating collaboration happened between feminist and queer movement, and now we consider them as if they belong together, but it wasn't the case 20 years ago. So this was a big step, and still a bit, I think, one of the biggest step in our movement in Africa, because we have strong allies, historical allies, that they have been working on their topics, and they have experience in advocacy since a long time, and this reinforced the movement a lot. And also the intersectional lenses in which, when they initiate something, they are inclusive of queers, and when queers initiate something, they have a strong ally. So this is the start, and it sets the stone for what is considered as queer movement in Africa. Of
But
course.
would you really say that it's the norm nowadays? Because I have so many examples in mind now of
That's why I said,
people.
of course.
Okay, sorry.
I was moving to the critical part. Of course, it's not generalized, and we are still advocating internally, even among the queer movement, there is a lot of fractions. But it's not a general truth, but it is in the levels in which it happened. It was very beneficial to the movement. We still have traditional feminist organizations that even don't believe, for example, you need to include Black people, and they are not inclusive of many communities. And we have this, I have many examples in Tunisia, and we are still struggling and pushing toward that. But also, in my experience, especially in Tunisia and even in some West African countries, we we have one ally, the feminist movement. This is also very important. For people advocating, for example, for social economics rights, they don't want to be associated to us. So it's very important for us to acknowledge that this collaboration was beneficial, and also it brings us to many spaces that we were isolated from, and it was also another opportunity for us to go from that margin to the center of public interaction and the civic space. But what is happening right now in the African continent, it is not as great as that, because when the movements were initiated and when people started claiming their rights, it provoked a backlash, and we are now witnessing a lot of bad examples in which the government, they started criminalization of sexuality. For example, in Senegal, the debate was not on the legal scale, but when movements were active and when the topic took a social space, they felt the need to do that. The same thing happened in Ghana, I guess 4 years ago. They mass arrested LGBTQI advocates and they criminalized. And I will not miss the example of Uganda, who I think by 2023 they sentenced by the death penalty for being associated to the queer movement. So it's not good news, and it's very difficult to analyze this because from one side the movement is getting stronger, is getting bigger, and it's getting recognized. From the other part, the backlash is even bigger. So it's very difficult to situate myself on I am I am hopeful or not for what's happening, because also we know that when oppression gets to the higher maximum level, it's the step to fall down, and this is historical, was very demonstrated in many examples in history. But we are now witnessing a very difficult era regarding LGBTQI rights, and I also have to note that the organizing way is going in another direction, because there is a global backlash. Actually, it's not only in Africa; it's happening globally, and the anti-rights movements are very present now. So it it's bringing communities to rethink their way of doing and to start connecting more with grassroots movements and more with the large public than trying to change the public policies. So maybe also it is an opportunity for us to rethink our way of doing and to do more efficient and grounded work. So it's a lot of ideas, and I'm not sure what is happening now because the world is going crazy, but I'm trying to keep hope.
Okay, maybe before we move to the question of what is empowering, what are the good news, I do want to go a step back and maybe ask you, can you summarize for us what are the interests of the people that are against queerness and equality for queer people in the legislation and also within the societies? How does that make sense? What are their interests?
A lot of interest, but I will name some of them. For example, I will name my context. Since our governments are failing on their most of their missions, and they need to blame someone for that, and they need to shift the attention of the society and our attention from their failure and from what's actually happening. So they need to find something provocative, and I think it happens also with migrants. It happens with all of the vulnerable communities inside of the country. So for example, in Tunisia, when the economic crisis reaches a level that we need to discuss. For example, for now we have many restrictions that people are advocating against, and even citizens that are not involved in activism, they want to do something to change realities. And up, we have a very official discourse from our president to blame LGBTQI communities and migrants, and to say that migrants are the ones who are stealing jobs. I think we know this discourse. They're stealing jobs, they are populating, they're changing the demographic composition of the country, and LGBTQI, they are destroying families, destroying values, and now it's gonna be the chaos. So for someone who will not go and make a deep analysis on what's happening really on in the police in the decision making scale, they will be terrified, and it will start a hate campaign. So for my context, this is the first reason that people why people they use these examples. But I
Reflection of other issues. Yeah.
Yes, and also I have other examples, especially in West Africa. because there is there is a big, I will not say that the religion is the one that is holding people from being free, but I would say that the religion is used in this regard, is used to as a tool to create divisions, and also for example, if there is a movement for LGBTQI rights who wants to communicate and to partner with environmental movement or social economic movement, it's not in the interest of any people in the power. So they need to create this division and they need to use something powerful that can affect people. So of course, religious beliefs. So in Senegal, I remember that there was a demonstration from Imams Association to they were in the streets and they made a tour of the of Dakar to tell people that LGBTQI communities are destroying religions. You don't need to talk to them. You don't need to collaborate with them. And I think also division is one of the main tools that oppressive powers use in our country and in our continent. And I think that there is multiple and very big list of reasons why they are doing that. But for me, these are the two main reasons.
How do queer people organize their campaigns, and how dangerous is it for them? Would you say that which are like effective or like successful campaigns?
Okay. So how they organize it's different from a country to another, from a context to another, of course. And even in the same country, the ways of doing evolves with time and change. So I will maybe name some examples, so I will not generalize for the entire continent. For example, in Tunisia, we were very conflictual and confrontational with our way of doing. So people were going in the streets, going to the parliament, suggesting projects of laws that to protect and empower and give rights to LGBTQI communities. Even in a personal space, we had spaces for LGBTQI communities, for party, for to also for them to feel the sense of community before the biggest backlash that we are experiencing right now after 2021, because in Tunisia we had a coup d'etat, but it was constitutional coup d'etat, so with no arms. And the president took over the power. So, and since 2021, the political landscape in Tunisia changed a lot. But between 2011 and 2021, we had created many organizations. I can name Damj, Mawjoudin, Falgatna. And it was very clear. We are LGBTQI movement. We are not HIV movement. We are not, it's not about health. It's about human rights. Now it's shifting. We don't dare to use these names, for example, anymore, because it will lead to imprisonment and too many repercussions that it's very heavy, and it will answer your question how dangerous it is. In other countries, West Africa, for example, it's more shifting to HIV protection, and they don't go into confrontation. They try to protect communities and create the community itself. In East Africa, for example, it's different. It's more about art. It's more about how to celebrate ourselves. I will not say it's East Africa. Let me say Kenya, because in Uganda it's not the same. For example, in Rwanda it's another history. So let me say in Kenya, it's very different. It's more about literature. It's more about reading, writing, and artistic demonstration. So it is different. And of course, for example, we use each other tools, but this I'm talking about the central tools that exist. How dangerous? It's very dangerous. It is very dangerous, and that's why there is a human rights organization that are working uh, only about security, physical and digital and digital security and safety, because it can lead, like it can destroy lives, and also people can be exposed in public. They can, even if you don't go to prison, there is a social punishment that can be even more difficult than imprisonment. So but people still have tools and still have ways of, they still find we still find ways of doing things. For example, now in Tunisia, we are more focusing on documentation, on all what is not seen in public, but very useful for our movement. And to talk about success stories, I have two examples. The first example is the work of Queer African Youth Network. They are doing an amazing work in West Africa. They are working on mental health. They are, and I will meet them next week. That's why I'm very happy. Every time they produce a report, every time they produce a study, it's something unique. It's something rooted in the West African context. They have a decolonized approach. They do everything differently. Even when I participate to their event, they change my way of seeing things, because all what we are used to do, we most of what we are used to do, it is influenced by colonial settings, and they have a way of in doing that, and their work is amazing. They are protecting communities. They have funds for protection, and they provide the magic of their work, that they are focusing on the long term and the short term actions when it comes to queerness in Africa. And the other example is, I think that we have a country that we need to celebrate in Africa, which is West Africa, which is South Africa. I will not say everything is perfect there in terms of queerness, but they achieved a lot. So they have trans ministry, which is impossible in most of the other countries. And also, when I was there, I felt that it's more comfortable to be queer there. And for me, it's a big indicator, because you can have any legislative settings and you can have every progressive law, but if society is not open to that, it will the change will never happen. And in South Africa, I realized that there is a lot of acceptance, and the topic is not a taboo, which is something I don't think that we achieved in the other countries. So yeah, so I celebrate South Africa, and also I had the privilege to be in a space in which the trans minister was present, and it was very inspiring. And I'm hoping for this example to inspire the other African countries, and maybe one day we will have LGBTQI openly expressing themselves in higher positions in our countries.
And can you maybe draw some experience from South Africa, because you were now praising it as such a good example in comparison to many other countries on the African continent? What has led to this legislation that they have implemented there? So is there like actions that you can take from there that you can try to reproduce in other settings, or do you think it was a unique situation because it was already some decades ago that they have implemented the law in South Africa that says, okay, also sexuality is part of the Non-Discrimination Act? Is that something that is feasible for other countries as well to achieve?
Oh, of course it's feasible, and of course it's one unique experience, and of course we can duplicate things from there. So everything is valid. The South African experience is very, very different from many other countries, or especially my context, because everything that happened there was radical, on the extreme. So racism achieved the point that, for example, in North Africa, we didn't experience something very visible, and also it was not micro, it was not something, not it was not ambiguous. It was, we are racist and we are doing this and it is what it is.
Yeah, you talk about the apartheid regime.
Yes, of
Yeah.
course, of course, of course. So, so what I think it created something in society, and the way that they went beyond that, and the way that they were able to create something new, peaceful, comparing to what happened and all the massacres that happened at that time. It was a radical shift. And it's my analysis, of course. I think it created or it implemented something in the global society, that they were ready to radical shifts, or they have to ability to imagine beyond the existent situation. Uh, for example, when I compare with Tunisia, we never had a clear conflict, and we never, for example, we didn't have a big movement to liberation from slavery. We didn't have a big movement for liberation on women's right. It was mostly a conversation that led to that. It was mostly a
Yeah, well, you had the Arab Spring.
I don't know if I can name it as spring. But also, if we compare it with what happened in South Africa, it's very, very different. It was very peaceful. It was very smooth, let's say, even if it was a big shift, but it was not something that reshaped the Tunisian mind. I don't know how to explain it, but it wasn't as transformative as that in Tunisia. And our current situation is the big witness, the biggest witness and the biggest proof that it didn't change the roots. The systems were already there. And I have to say also that our situation now and our president, he didn't create anything new. He just activated the systems that we already have. So comparing to South Africa, they they deconstructed something and they created something new, and that's why they have one of the oldest field of study on decolonization, and they have big awareness on decolonization. When I compare, for example, with my context, talking about the decolonization is kind of recent in the large activist spaces. Of course, there is some people who are specialized on that. Some communities started talking about that, but for us, it started like the 8 or maybe the 10 last years talking about decolonization. In South Africa, there is in universities that you have the right to study and you can study decolonization, which also I believe it participated at that. And also this is something very personal, that I believe it's not an intellectual thinking. I think when the country suffers a lot like this, sometimes they can go to the direction that we don't want any more conflicts anymore. Let's try to focus on other things. And I could sense it in South Africa and also in Rwanda, that people were going, even if they are not comfortable with something, they prefer going to the peaceful way. It's like either going to the very dangerous confrontal way or the peaceful way. So the middle ground is disappearing a little bit in these countries.
So, how could European development cooperation efficiently support queer people in Africa without reproducing colonialism?
So we are talking about countries or activists?
I think both would be
Yes.
interesting, but you know, in Germany, in the last couple of years, we had a big debate on something that they called feminist foreign policy. And it had been criticized heavily because they said, okay, the way that feminist foreign policy was deducted by the minister at that time was was promoting a kind of European perspective on feminism, and
Mhm.
usually did not really support the ways in which women in the respective countries would have actually wanted to be supported. So that in the end, they were supporting projects that, from a German perspective, were feminist. But
Mhm.
from the perspective of women, for example, in Tanzania, it was not helping their position at all. Same as in projects in Senegal, where then the women ended up having more trouble actually because the man said, oh, you are trying to take our positions away. Now the women are getting all of the money, but traditionally we're the ones who are supposed to have the money. So that is where this question is coming from about how now, when we think about queer people in Africa, how could a European or any other country in the world do a development cooperational project that would actually support instead of making more trouble?
Hmm. Oh my God. Okay, I have one thought about this because deep down in my heart, I think it's very difficult to be achievable in this era to get non-colonial support from European countries. But the one thing that can be done is letting the communities lead on these programs of cooperation internally. For example, if you want to support queer people in Senegal, let the Senegalese person in German do this and initiate the work and don't interfere with their way of doing if they decide to do something that is not in your advantage as a country. Other than that, I have no example of any foreigner country that interfered with maybe very tiny examples of person like very personal when someone takes over a role and go about their roles in non-colonial way, but the systems that they are already there, it's very enabling for people to duplicate and to implement colonial settings. But for activists and for communities who are in these countries, and I also get questions all the time, how what can we do to help, what can we do to help, and it's always in the community's mind that the thing that they need to do to help is directed to us. It means that they need to do something in our countries. But I believe that for me, the most efficient way for them to help us and to support us is to do the pressure in their countries and to do the work internally. So it will be projected on their politics when they deal to us. For example, when we talk about migration or queerness, I don't think someone from Italy, because Tunisia, Italy, we have this migration relationship. I don't think that someone from Italy can do something in Tunisia, but they can do pressure in their government so they can change or or they can impact the migration policies. So this is always what I ask. Just do the work internally. We will see the benefits one day in our context because unfortunately, our future and our situation is very, very impacted by what happens in these countries.
Yeah, so you already mentioned the aspect of migration, and you already pointed out that there is this kind of relationship in Italy. So, from what I understand from what you're saying, you want people in Italy to then rally for their own government to allow more queer people from Tunisia to migrate on a within a legal framework to seek protection. Is that right?
Exactly. And we have this relation also with France. And now they did a lot of restrictions. So many asylum requests, they are refused because they added restrictions, and Tunisia is still considered as a safe country because there is no nuance in the way of labeling countries. Because of course we don't have war, so it's not you don't risk your life every day in Tunisia. But I can't say that it's a safe country, for example, for Black or LGBTQI queer people, because it's not. So why we have to just, for example, it's something that needs to change in Europe. Why we can just say this is safe and unsafe? Why it's black or white question? Because it is safe, but not as safe for queer people to be far from harm. So I always ask my friends in France, just do the advocacy for this to change and for the politics of migration and of migration to be more inclusive and to be open to the reality and not blind about what's happening in the other parts of the world.
And when we think now about a rather continental scale, do you see that there is something like safer spaces for queer Africans to migrate to in general? Are there countries that are known for being receptive towards queer Africans, where we have diaspora communities that could be of support from outside as well?
So we are talking in Europe or in Africa, because Kenya accepts queer refugees.
Aha. No, I actually thought rather about outside because I know, for example, that many West Africans find it easy to move to Brazil, for example, because also trans
Yes.
people's rights there are better enforced than in other countries. So I was thinking about trends of where people go to because they already have maybe a community there on site.
Mhm. Yes. So the example of Brazil is very important because it's kind of, I will not say new destination, but it's not the classic destination of African and West African people, because we are used to have this relationship with Europe. And when people think about human rights and migration and going to a better situation, they directly think about people about Europe. And this is what I like, even with people moving to Kenya, even though it's not the best experience, but still, or people moving to South American countries, it's very it 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 shows that people are rethinking what we were doing. For European countries, I would not say that there is one country that is more welcoming than the other. I would say some countries accept refugees, some others not don't. But the process is painful everywhere. So I don't think that there is a country that have like holistic approach when it comes to asylum in Europe. And even in Brazil, it's not a holistic approach. It's just that the context, the social context is close to our social context in Africa, so there is a reduced layer of frustration. But even the administrative process in Brazil, it's not that easy, but it's still a more comfortable experience for people who will move there.
Okay. Now let me see what else was on our catalog. I think we've done a good deal with the questions already. Uh, yeah, Sophie, do you want to maybe do the last one?
Yes, I can do the finishing question. Do you have any suggestions for Black queer literature for those who want to learn more?
Yes.
Perfect.
I suggest the book, very basic title, Queers in Africa, because it's one of my favorite books, and it is written by someone. The name is challenging. Is Zethu Mebenti? Yeah, Zethu Metebeni, and I will write it to you. because it's one of the most inspiring books that analyzes the situation in Africa. There is also another book called Guapa by a Lebanese writer, and it's not analytic. It's a story of a gay man in the Swana region, and it's a very good book to enjoy.
Great.
Okay, super. Now, I was already, while you were answering the question, trying to sneak in with a little photo of all of us together. So, if you don't
Oh,
mind, maybe to close up this episode, I can take like a little photograph of our screen together. So,
oh.
oops, maybe without the camera being in there.
You don't want to take a screenshot?
Girl, that would be too easy.
It's more
Okay.
retro like that with the
Yeah.
computer.
Right, it's okay. Okay, I'm learning from you.
But all right, so to finish up, yeah, let's say thank you to you
Thank you.
for being here with us on this episode. I think we have learned a lot, and also with your recommendations for those who are interested, they certainly can learn more about it. And yeah, thank you, and hope to see you again next time.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Bye bye.